All right. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you all for being here today. Uh, as John mentioned, I am the program supervisor for the Refugee Resettlement Program. I'm just under a year now in my role, and it has been a long, arduous, but very fruitful and rewarding year. And so, what I'm going to do today is kind of go over a number of different things. I'm going to start with defining what it means to be a refugee here in the U.S., discuss what refugees bring to their community. We're going to talk about challenges refugees face before and after they get here, give a little bit of demographics on the refugees that are being settled in our region. We'll discuss challenges with the program, some successes as well, and then I'll wrap up, provided we have time, with some Q&A where I can answer any questions that anybody might have from the presentation. This presentation is an adaptation of our volunteer presentation. So as I go over the challenges, I will also include suggestions about how community members might help. I love to preface that those are just suggestions. There are so many different ways that community members can be involved with refugee resettlement. It's not limited to what I suggest today. So if, as I go through my presentation, you have an idea or a suggestion that you think may work, please, we are always all ears. Not everything is something we can immediately implement, but this program only started in 2023. It's still new. We're still building the road for its long-term success. And so we love to jot down ideas, and sometimes we can make them a reality right away. Other times are things that we can work long-term towards. So with that being said, I will get started on our definition of a refugee and what they provide to our community. There's a lot of conversation about migrants and asylum seekers and refugees in the news, in the media right now, and a lot of those definitions, those classifications get kind of overlapped. Refugee is its own distinct class in United States law. It is somebody who has, I'm not going to read this verbatim, but somebody who has demonstrated to the satisfaction of the United States government that they are being persecuted or fear persecution due to race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or some other membership of a particular social group. So they apply when they are in a refugee camp, or in rare cases while they're still in their home country, for refugee status. Their cases are reviewed, their backgrounds are checked, they're screened medically, and these are the individuals that are coming to the U.S. They've already been screened and reviewed. There are lots of humanitarian reasons to want to help refugees. They're fleeing persecution. We want people to feel comfortable. We want them to feel safe. We want to help reunite families. But there are a lot of practical benefits to helping refugees as well. And so I like to focus on that, because both the conversation of humanitarian aid and practical benefit need to happen for the community to really understand why we're pursuing this path. This infographic here is specific to New York State. Refugees, as of a survey in 2019, were responsible for $2.4 billion in local taxes paid. Nationwide, 13% of entrepreneurial enterprises are run by refugees. Across 17 different states, refugees have over $1 billion in spending power. They make meaningful long-term contributions to the economy of the United States, and in the towns and cities where they are settled, those contributions are more immediate and faster in coming. Refugees do have a long-term positive effect. When they arrive here, they are, I don't want to say a drain on resources, but it is expensive to house them and help them stabilize. But once they've been here for 20 years, many of them have median home incomes higher than that of American-born citizens. Their resilience, their ingenuity really mark the communities that they are able to join. And so we're happy to have them here in Binghamton. We have worker shortages left and right in the area. They can help us fill those gaps and help us find new and interesting ways to innovate within our communities. Our local refugees are from all over the world. Our two largest populations for this last year have been Syrian and Afghani, but we also have clients from Guatemala, Honduras, Colombia, Costa Rica, the Congo, Sudan, Pakistan, Venezuela, They're coming from everywhere. And unfortunately, the global number of refugees has risen every year for the last 5 years. So this diversity is only going to continue increasing as crises around the globe keep happening. Challenges faced by refugees. As I mentioned, they have demonstrated that they are currently being oppressed or have reasonable fear of oppression. Many of them have been forced out of their homes. They've lost their income. They've lost their careers. Some of my clients have been engineers for 20 years and are now upended and living here in the US, struggling to find an entry-level job, which is where the unemployment comes in. Trauma and mental health struggles. Some of our clients go straight from their home country into a refugee camp, and while those are technically a safer place to be, they're full of a lot of stress, a lot of uncertainty that doesn't give them time to unpack the trauma of their oppression and kind of compound that trauma with new struggles. So when they move here to the US, they're really just finally getting the opportunity to sit down and confront that trauma and unpack it. Discrimination and xenophobia, unfortunately, those are challenges that they've experienced that cause them to leave their home, but they're also challenges that they have when they arrive here at home. I think we're all aware of the conversation of immigrants here in the US. So obviously, that's one of those unfortunate through lines that they have to deal with all the time. Language and cultural barriers, and then, of course, vulnerability and exploitation to abuse. If you're new to a country, you don't know what systems of protection are in place. You don't know how things are run. If you've come from a country with an oppressive government, you may not necessarily understand what is and isn't your right now that you're here in the US. And so because of that, they are very vulnerable to being taken advantage of once they're here in the US. Over the last year, we have received 55 refugees here in the southern tier. All but 2 of them settled in Broome County, 2 of them settled in Sullivan County with family members that they already had. As I mentioned, all of these refugees are screened by the US government prior to their arrival here. When they arrive here, they basically have every right except the right to vote. If you have the right to it, again, other than the right to vote, then our refugees have a right to it. They immediately have the right to work, have the right to health care, family reunification, protection from persecution and violence. They don't often have the documents that prove this status because they've arrived here and we're still waiting for the documents to catch up. And that's why it's important to understand that refugee is a specific classification and not just a word that we throw around when we're talking about migrants. If somebody is a refugee, it means that they have these rights, even if they don't necessarily have the paperwork yet because they're so new to the US. So how does my program work? In 2023, the International Rescue Committee contacted us because they were starting what they called the affiliate partnership model. The International Rescue Committee has their own offices throughout the country, but they thought that it would be easier for them to increase the refugee resettlement network by working with local organizations who understood what is available in their community rather than building a whole new office and trying to develop that themselves. The International Rescue Committee is one of, I believe there are 12 now, 12 resettlement organizations throughout the country that work with the Department of State, specifically the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, or PRM, as we shorten it. Refugee reception and placement is a specific type of program that is overseen by the Department of State, RNP. So all of these resettlement agencies work under those same parameters. Catholic Charities, Church World Services, us, we all operate under the same core guidelines. So when the IRC gets their allotment of cases approved by the Department of State, they determine what regions might be good for all of these refugees to settle in. They look at our local demographics, they look at state laws and protections, they look at what is just available to the community. And when they reach out to us to see if if we have the capacity to settle a family, we let them know yes or no, we think this family is a good fit. Once we agree to take on a family into the area, we're kind of placed into a holding pattern. they begin going through their final processing, their overseas cultural orientation, and we wait for a travel notification. Just because we've said, yes, we can take this family doesn't mean we're ready to prepare for them. In fact, the ACA assured, it's called assurance, assured 2 refugees early last program year who still haven't had travel dates. Sometimes a travel date comes 3 weeks after we've assured a family. Sometimes we're waiting months. When they have that travel date, however, we're given 2 weeks notice to prepare for their arrival. And so this is where the time frame of the RMP program really is important to highlight. It's hard for us to make long-term plans about refugee arrival while we're still growing our program because we get such short notice, but we're not receiving such a large quantity of refugees that we always have a family coming in. So we have kind of feast or famine. Well, we'll have a couple months, maybe a quarter where we don't receive a ton of refugees, and then a quarter where we receive a whole bunch. And so I'd like to highlight that because when we're talking about cooperating with organizations, I just want all of our partners to understand that sometimes we really don't have any need for assistance, but when we do, we really need assistance. And so we kind of operate on that very quick turnover. So when we get that 2-week travel notice, we have to secure and furnish housing for these refugees. We have to provide groceries for at least 2 weeks. And when I say furnish, I mean furnish. We're buying sofas, dining room tables, all the chairs that go to the table. We're buying the broom, the mop bucket, the shower curtains. We are fully stocking and furnishing a house for these families as much as possible. On the day of arrival, we pick the refugees up from the airport. We're pretty much the first non-government workers that they meet in the US. We arrive, they get dropped off at the Binghamton airport. They don't arrive through the Binghamton airport because I think we all know there's only like 1 flight a day coming through there. So they arrive through JFK, which is an official port of entry, and then they are driven from JFK to the Binghamton airport, which is, they're already usually traveling between 24 and 48 hours at that point, and then they've got to get in that 4-hour car ride up to the Binghamton airport. It's a very long, arduous day. And so because of that, we provide them with their first hot meal here in the US, bring them to their housing, kind of introduce them to what the house looks like, let them know how everything works. This is how you contact us for emergencies, etc. And then we let them be for about 24 hours before we move on to the remainder of our services. They are officially part of our program for 90 days from that day of arrival. Over those 90 days, we have to create a foundation for stability. And I say foundation because stability is not actually an outcome of the program. It's not a targeted outcome of the program. We understand that 90 days is not enough to come to a new country and completely be ready to adapt and integrate. But we want to create as much of a foundation as possible so that these refugee families can see a future where they are fully integrated into the community. So we help them find employment. We apply for assistance through the Department of Social Services. We help them learn how to navigate public transportation, enroll in English classes. We get their children enrolled in school, and we help them navigate the medical system as much as we can. This list looks very small and looks very simple, but every one of those bullets comes with a whole bunch of questions. Finding employment, refugees with careers often don't have that education or experience recognized once they're here in the US. Generally, professional refugees end up having to work entry-level jobs, in part because they're still learning English, in part because we don't really have a culture of recognizing international educational standards here in our community. Applying for assistance through the Department of Social Service is a trial every time. Every family requires a different amount of documentation, requires a different amount of proof. We need information from their landlords, information when it's a single family household, they need to decide whether or not they want to apply for child support and what that means, whether or not the father is here in the US somewhere else or back in their home country. Learning how to navigate public transportation. Where do you get off for your hospital? Where do you get off for your school? Where do you get off to get home? Every one of these bullets comes with another whole web of questions and problems to solve. To support all of the above, we are provided with $1,325 per refugee. Yeah, that's that's the right response. It's not enough. The Department of State knows it's not enough, and it is intended as part of the program that we build community connections to supplement this minimal amount. And again, this is per refugee, so larger families will have a larger sum. But if you're looking at a single individual, single apartment around here can be anywhere between $700 to $800 plus a security deposit. That's $1,400 to $1,600. You're already out of the assistance that the grant has provided. And so we spend a lot of our time just trying to make our resources work to make the stability work for our families. And so that's when we're going to talk about challenges faced by the RMP program. Funding. It's not enough. I've heard word that it might be going up for the next program year, which starts in October. We haven't officially signed anything yet. And so whether or not I believe it's going up, we'll see. Once that signature is on paper, then I'll believe it. They say it should be going up to about $1,600. It's still not enough. It is quite a bit more. Our previous year before this one was $1,275. So the increase is much more significant for next year if they actually go through with it. But you'll see rental costs on average right now are about 68% of per capita funding. And actually, I have a new statistic on that from a report I wrote on Friday. For the total sum of money we received from the grant, 80% of that was spent on housing. This is initial rental costs. This is first month's rent and security. That's 68%. We only guarantee 1 month's rent for a refugee. Obviously, these refugees are not going to be working and receiving benefits in their first 30 days. So no refugee only receives 1 month of rent assistance. And that's where that 80% of total grant funding is spent on housing, because we spend additional money helping them maintain housing stability. And staffing constraints. I have one housing specialist who negotiates with landlords, does security checks with apartments, sets up apartments, and then I have 2 caseworkers that handle all the rest. They're typically overloaded with questions and texts and phone calls that are coming in at all hours of the day. And they're really focused on those core services from the prior slide. Because the staff is so small, we really only have the time to focus on those core foundational services, and it's hard for us to address anything outside of that. And so this is how we look towards community members to assist us. Community members can help refugees by driving them to appointments outside of those at the ACA. Doctor's appointments, interviews, appointments at WIC, appointments to get their childcare in order. Or if you're not comfortable having a refugee in your car with you because you're worried about communication barriers and everything, picking up and delivering donations to families is another great way you can save my team time while also supporting refugees. Dropping off a bag of clothes to a family and just smiling and waving hello is so impactful to these families. I cannot overstate that. Just having somebody show up with a bag of goods that they know is for them can really make their day. Volunteers can also greatly reduce labor time for housing setup. As I mentioned, I've got one housing specialist. Many times we're able to pull other staff to help him set up an apartment, but when we have a particularly busy quarter, he's doing it by himself while the caseworkers are working with other individuals, other refugees. That means getting the furniture out of storage and putting it into the house, cleaning the house, getting all the groceries in the house, cleaning all the dishes that were donated and making sure they're presentable. Additional labor, additional individuals helping us with this prep can really ensure that a house is set up and presentable and feels homey. Right now, when I've got one guy who's able to do it over the course of 4 hours, he's doing a great job, but you can tell that this apartment was set up over the course of a few hours. And we would love for our refugees to be able to walk into a house that really looks set up and intentionally placed to make it feel like home. And so that's one of the big things that my director and I are pushing for with community members to assist with. It's one of the few volunteer tasks that don't require communication. You don't have to be multilingual for it. You can just come in, help us set up an apartment, take a few pictures, next to the sofa, and the refugees know the community is there to help support them. Which does bring me into the next one, language access, obviously a major barrier for our refugees. Again, their lives have been upended. Many of them had no plans to leave their home country, had no plans to learn English. So a lot of times their first exposure to studying English is once they've already arrived here in the US. Language access in the area is getting a little bit better, especially for Spanish-speaking refugees. But for the most part, information is available in English and only in English. If we're looking at energy saving initiatives from Cornell Cooperative Extension, they're all in English. If we're looking at community boards over at Strange Brew, everything's in English. It's hard for them to understand what services are available to them because they have to navigate figuring out what all of these words mean in English. Some refugees arrive with some English proficiency, but they may lack the vocabulary for complicated systems like health insurance or public benefits communications. I lack the vocabulary for health insurance. I couldn't explain that to you. But even when we have a lot of this translated, refugees don't necessarily have the vocabulary in their native language for these systems. Some of our refugees are coming here very well educated and learned. Others are coming here and they may not even be literate in their own language. And so we have a real strong need for in-person translation. We have an over-the-phone language access line. It's great for when you absolutely have to use it. It's great to be able to communicate with a client over the phone, but there's so much lost over the phone that an in-person translator can pick up. There's nonverbal communication, there's signs of confusion, there's signs of discomfort that an in-person translator can pick up on and address and help a client build rapport and trust so that they feel comfortable asking the questions that are really important to them and making sure they really understand what it is that we're trying to communicate to them. Our biggest language needs right now, Spanish, Arabic, Dadi, and Urdu. That's not a comprehensive list and is subject to change at any moment. I know that we're receiving a family of 3 from Myanmar later next year. We don't have a travel date yet, so we'll need Burmese. Thankfully, I've been able to secure some Burmese translation, but really these languages can change at any time. One of the things about individuals who are multilingual, not everybody feels comfortable speaking another language that they know. If any of you here are multilingual, I think you know that writing and reading in a language can sometimes be easier than speaking it with a native speaker. Or maybe you are really fluent in that language, but you don't feel comfortable translating the sort of private, intimate details that a refugee might want to discuss. Document translation is also an extremely important need for my program. We've got so many documents and flyers, as I've mentioned, in English that provide refugees with information for services. If anybody is multilingual and would be willing to just translate some documents for us, it allows our refugees to take these home and reference them as they need, instead of having to constantly call their caseworker to verify information. Social support is another major challenge of the RMP program. This chart here says no U.S. tie and U.S. tie. A U.S. tie is a friend or family member whom the refugee would like to be settled near. This individual usually provides spiritual, emotional, or material support. 75% of our clients arrive with no U.S. tie. The ACA is their full social, material, and spiritual support. And in fact, 100% of single parent households that we have settled have had no U.S. tie. So if you want to think about how difficult it already is to be in the U.S. As a single parent taking care of children, Now imagine that you're in a country and you have no family, no pre-existing friends, and you're relying on one agency to help you cover all the demands of being a single parent. It's very difficult. Um, and so this is where we're really looking for communities who would be willing to step in and show that there is community support for our refugees. One of the things my caseworkers would love is community members who are willing to travel to the airport on arrival day and just give like a little show of welcome to refugees who are arriving here. It wouldn't be anything long because, as I mentioned, they have very long travel days and probably aren't too interested in shaking hands and meeting people. But it's just a nice show of support. The caveat there is that many of our refugees arrive between 8 and 11 p.m. So these wouldn't be like midday or morning welcome meetings. But also neighborhood orientation. Our refugees are placed in their permanent housing or their temporary housing, and we're very focused on all the core services, getting them meetings with employers, getting them meetings with DSS, but we don't really get an opportunity to show them around their neighborhood. There are so many resources in every neighborhood of Broome County that they may not be aware of, and they have nobody to show them around. And this is where another one of those volunteer resources where you don't really have to be multilingual. While Google Translate is not a perfect tool, being able to say, oh, this place does free laundry every Tuesday, that can get translated almost 100% of the time. You can take a refugee, walk around the neighborhood, point them out to resources that are very simple and easy to use. So neighborhood orientation is one of the things that we've put forth. The Broome County Food Council has an excellent community resource map that can be used to show refugees where everything is, but it's all in English. Having somebody who could walk around the neighborhood with them and point out what all those symbols mean for them would be amazing, or even do some warm handoffs with food pantries or clothing closets or what have you. And this kind of rolls into the next challenge, cultural integration. Being a refugee can be very isolating. Whether you're settled here by yourself or whether you're settled here with family, typically you are in a home with the bare minimum of things. You've got a place to sit, you have lights, you have clothes. You don't have a TV, you don't have books, you might have cell phone access. You don't really have a friend social network yet. You have your caseworker who can answer kind of logistical questions, but otherwise you're just at home. Some refugees, as I mentioned, are afraid to navigate their communities. I know a lot of our refugees from Central America have asked us if there are curfews or neighborhoods they're not allowed to be in, and so they just stay at home because they haven't adapted to U.S. culture yet, and they think that it's dangerous to go out and explore the neighborhood. So we find that it's really important to try to integrate them into our community as much as possible. And the best way to do that is through community members who are willing to take them out. Volunteering with the ACA does not have to mean bringing a refugee to an appointment. It doesn't have to mean bringing a refugee or helping a refugee navigate complicated documentation. It can mean going hiking, going canoeing, visiting a museum, attending the Speedy Fest, going to a church service if you share that. Refugees want to have hobbies. They're just like us. We want things to do outside of the home. And so it can be very fruitful for volunteers to build relationship with the refugees. Things that don't even necessarily require language. We have community gardens all throughout Broome County. Showing refugees how to garden doesn't necessarily require a language. Just demonstrate how, what they can do. So we're looking for volunteers who would be interested in doing fun outings with our refugees, showing them around the neighborhood. I've got one volunteer who he meets with one of our refugees from Venezuela in Endicott a couple times a month, and they walk around their neighborhood. And he points things out to her. He tells her a little bit about the history of the neighborhood. They've really built such a strong relationship on that. Also, attending ACA cultural events and learning a little bit more about the culture that our refugees come from. I think it's not very well known, but ACA events are always open to the public. You do not have to be an immigrant. You do not have to be ethnically distinct to come to an ACA event. If we're celebrating, the Lunar New Year, we want you to come and check it out. If we're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, come check it out. Those events are meant to bring both communities together so that we can better understand each other and build stronger relationships. And in this way, you might, rub elbows with a refugee and build a friendship and be able to provide that social support that they're in so much need of. But I don't want to focus strictly on challenges, and I'd like to talk about some program highlights over the last year. 100% of our refugees were placed in permanent housing within their first 90 days. Now, if you haven't had to look for an apartment recently, you may not understand why that is so impressive, but it's really hard to find housing in the area. I'm not sure that I would be able to find a house for me in the next 90 days. In fact, this time last year, less than 1 in 100 landlords that we contacted were even willing to have a conversation with us. But we're starting to build connections, we're starting to build relationships, and so we're starting to get refugees moved into permanent housing much sooner. 88% of refugee households have at least one income. The majority of our refugees came this year between April and June. And so we're talking about individuals who knew no English, who had to adapt to a new culture, and almost one person from each household at least has started working and has a steady income that they can rely on. 20% of refugees have access to a vehicle. Our previous year, 0% of them had access to a vehicle by the end of the program year. So this is a huge increase. And while I have it here listed under program highlights, the ACA actually can't take too much credit for this. We had a Syrian refugee from the prior program year who was able to pass the U.S. driver's license exam and secure a vehicle. And he has kind of taken it upon himself to create this Arabic-speaking driver's school. And every time we have a new family of Arabic speakers, he links up with them and he explains to them how they can pass the driver's exam here, and he connects them with a community member who offers them loans for relatively cheap used cars. And it really provides them with so much mobility and freedom. It also provides them with some additional income. I've had multiple of my refugee clients drop off some DoorDashed food. It's just a surprise to see them on my porch dropping off some food. I know that they've got some supplemental income now as well. It gives them the freedom to tap into that gig work economy that's been building up in the US, and again, explore some financial freedom and some mobile freedom. And then community donations and fundraising have provided an additional $436 per refugee this year. May not sound a lot. That's about $23,000 for the whole program year total. That's a month's worth of groceries for a large family. That's almost 50% of a rental payment. That's a bunch of utility bills. Where we're talking about the small amount of money that the refugees receive to start with, this is a massive increase. And that's done through community support, and I'll go a little bit more into that in our next slide. The ACA is also committed to creative solutions for problems that we have. In March of this year, we opened our Refugee Welcome Center, which is in the south side of Binghamton. It is a three-apartment building that has 9 bedrooms. So we can house a maximum of 21 refugees there temporarily. We do charge them very low cost of rent, mostly because we offer free housing. It would be very hard to get families to permanent housing. So we set a standard of paying rental costs. 43% of our clients used the Refugee Welcome Center this past year. The average stay was about 41 days. This is also where we have our storage shed. You can see it in the back of this picture here from our most recent donation and inventory volunteer day, where we store donations that we've received from community members. We have it right there so that when we have families who need, 9 times out of 10, we just grab it from the shed and move it upstairs into one of the apartments. This has been a really great solution to the housing problem. It's why it's been so easy for us to find permanent housing for the refugees, because we know we have a stable place for them to go while we negotiate with landlords. One of the other major successes we had this year was thanks to Trinity Church. Earlier this year, your organization donated $5,000 to the Refugee Resettlement and Placement Program. You managed to make that donation during our busiest quarter since the program has started. Between April and June, we settled 34 refugees out of the 55 that we settled last year. And so your donation impacted 34 refugees, spanning 9 different families from Nicaragua, Honduras, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Guatemala. 4 of those families were single-parent households, representing 72% of the children that we settled this year. This family in the top picture here is a family of 6 from Honduras, so they're with our housing specialist, Hekmet. They were one of the last families to arrive in that quarter. And because it was so busy, our Refugee Welcome Center was actually full. Your donation, specifically this big purple temporary housing slice here, allowed us to find them a fairly nice Airbnb that they were able to stay at for 2 weeks while we found a permanent apartment for another family at the Refugee Welcome Center. We moved them out and we moved this family in. Not only did it allow them to have a comfortable stay somewhere while we waited on getting them some interim housing, when we found them a permanent house, we had the funds for their security deposit, again, because your donation helped us save that direct assistance money. Yeah. This individual at the bottom here is a woman from Afghanistan who settled here by herself. She had no U.S. tie. She had no community support, no family members here. Because of that, she received the minimum amount of direct assistance, the $13.25. Her apartment was $750 a month. Gone. Your donation allowed us to supply her with household supplies, allowed us to supply her with halal food that she needed because she's Muslim. It allowed us to really furnish her apartment in a way that we might not have been able to otherwise. 100% of your donation went back to the refugees. None of it went to any admin or anything at the American Civic Association. It was entirely spent on these 34 individuals that arrived between May and June. Your donation represents about 20% of the total donations we received for the year, but I think it had the largest impact as far as individuals, like number of individuals touched by a donation. And so that's really it for the presentation. I've explained the program, I've explained our needs, explained our challenges. So if anybody has any questions, I invite you to ask them of me. And also, my marketing team has asked me to push our 85-year fundraising push that we're going to be doing from now until the end of the year. American Civic Association's been here in Broome County for 85 years. We're trying to make a big shebang of it. I think December 13th, we're planning to have a community celebration, but don't quote me on that yet. We're still working on the details. But are there any questions about the program?
Yes. I have this question about Afghanistan.
Yeah.
What percentage of the immigrants coming from there are women?
Good question. I think with the exception of that one woman who settled here by herself, probably about 60%, I would say.
Yeah, because you do hear how they're being treated there, and it's like.
Yeah, well, and then that's one of the trials of the program too, is a cultural understanding of gender equality here in the U.S. Because where they have lived, it's kind of a cultural expectation often that the man will work and the woman will stay at home and take care of the family. One of my caseworkers is from Afghanistan, and we have this conversation all the time. She's working, but it's caused some friction in their household. Discussing gender equality and also discussing the fact that you really kind of need 2 incomes in a household to maintain quality of life in the U.S. has been one of the tough conversations we've had from individuals from that region.
You have a pretty good idea of when the next group is coming?
So the program year goes from October to September. So our next program year starts next month. I don't have any travel dates yet, but we've already assured, as I mentioned, 3 individuals from Myanmar. We've got 4 individuals from El Salvador and 1 individual from Venezuela that we've agreed to take on for next year. My assumption would be that they are here before November. So, but I don't have any travel dates yet, so it's hard to say. But they should be coming probably mid-October is when I would assume we would get our first arrival.
Do you set up an apartment prior to their coming?
Yeah. Thankfully, right now, our welcome center is totally empty. So we'll be able to provide interim housing right away to our first few families.
Are they furnished, those apartments furnished?
So we've been very lucky that we've received a lot of donations over the last few months that we were able to use to kind of set up the house and furnish them for now. In fact, it's a good problem to have, but the ACA is on a donation pause right now because we're kind of overflowing with donations to the point where our shed was kind of impossible to navigate because we had taken on too many things. Again, a good problem to have. We're going to try to maintain probably 5 families worth of goods in that shed going forward. So whenever we dip below 5, I'll probably put out a mass, hey, we need supplies to all of our partners. But right now we have enough seating, enough furnishing for all of the families. It doesn't necessarily match, it's all based on donations. But they will have places to sleep and places to sit when they arrive here.
I have some suggestions for you.
Yeah, please.
Number 1, you might want to contact NPR about this donation, the anniversary fundraiser that you're doing, because they allow nonprofits to advertise on that.
Yeah, that's an excellent
that
suggestion.
will get you some money.
Pardon me, I'm just writing some notes down.
That's right.
All right.
Second thing, in terms of volunteers, I think people who are working are the least people that you can get hold of to help you volunteer. But retirees and college students. So, you have kids from all over the world. If you contact the president's office, they have programs where they can volunteer and get college credits. So it's a win-win for everybody. They can point you to where you need to go there, because I'm not sure exactly where that is being operated best. They can do that for you.
Yeah.
So that if you need volunteers to help you interpret, they may have somebody who can do it. If you need them to translate, they can have somebody to help you do that. And physically coming over there to volunteer also. They do give credit for that. And this is just a long-term thing. If you can ask some of the folks that you work with or some of the volunteers to come up with a standardized way of furnishing an apartment, in terms of what you need to have in an apartment, number of plates, furniture, cutleries, pillows, and things like that, that will help you standardize what you need to keep in stock. So that if you need it, you have a book, how it needs to be set up. Easily you can set it up and it will look nice. And that's it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. To your last point, we actually do kind of have that. One of the benefits of our program is while the ACA has only been doing it since 2023, the Department of State has had this R&P program for longer than that. So there are a lot of things that are established. So we do have a minimum supply list that we use to determine how many families worth of goods we have. It really is vital. So you're right on the money there. One of the things that I do struggle with when sharing that document out with partner organizations is it's a minimal list. It's really the bare minimum that somebody would want to have in their home. And so sometimes when we share that supply list, our partner agencies will kind of stick to that list, which I completely understand. It's an easy list to follow, but then our refugees don't have things like TVs, microwaves, blenders, little quality of life things that you don't realize you really want to have around. You don't need them, but they help in a lot of different ways. And so that's one of the reasons why I don't necessarily highlight the list, but internally we use it all the time.
Don't forget to reach out to the senior homes and things around here. Because, individual, because, some of them have disposable incomes.
Yeah.
And some of them will leave, your organization in their will or whatever it is. So that, I don't think you have anything to lose in reaching out to.
No, that's an excellent angle. I actually, I haven't heard that one before. And that's great. No, this is why we come out to the community, because everybody has such a different experience with what's available in the community. We can't all know 100% of what's available. And then,
Excuse me, on
please.
that point, WSKG TV, they have a guy over there, Chris Sturienza. We hear his name all the time on the street. He is he seems to be an expert in for older people who are setting up their estates or just looking at disposing of their estates at some point after their death. How you can benefit not-for-profits without costing yourself anything right now.
Yeah.
There are all these things like these charitable remainder trusts and so on. And so I think it's a long-term thing, and it wouldn't be necessarily specifically for the refugee program, but it would benefit the organization in general.
Yeah. Chris Rienzo, you said?
His name is Christy Rienzo.
Thank you.
Yeah. But the other thing I wanted to say, have you ever had the experience that a particular congregation in a church like ours would actually sort of adopt one or two families? Has that ever happened?
So we've talked about advertising a sort of like adopt a refugee program, but we haven't implemented that yet. The donation need for the ACA has skyrocketed since implementing this program, and we've struggled to catch up programmatically with that need. So we actually recently hired an AmeriCorps position specifically focused on building a fundraising plan for us over the next year. And I think that's really an excellent opportunity there for the Adopt a Refugee program to be built into that.
So if you put a face to a group and you say this particular family with husband and wife and two children, maybe, they're going to be living roughly wherever.
Mhm.
And within the congregation, people would perhaps go and visit and supply things, as you say, the things they don't have.
Yeah.
Extra things.
And the IRC actually has a program. We're going to be doing a training on this soon called the Community Sponsorship Program, which is a little similar to that. It's where private citizens in our area can agree to provide core services to a refugee that is being settled through the ACA. The way the model works is that those citizens would provide a financial contribution to the program and then assist with supporting a family. We don't know too much about it yet. We have a planned training later in October, but I imagine that'll help us inform kind of this connecting community members directly with specific refugees. But yeah, definitely keep your eye out for that, because we know that we have to move on it, just figuring out the logistics of it and how to safeguard refugees in the meantime, and we're connecting them directly with community members as well.
So Steve, if there are people who are interested in volunteering and say, ask one of us, how do you do it? Is it just simply calling the ACA number, or is there a better way of sort of approaching the organization to say, I'd be interested in volunteering for the refugee program?
Yeah. I would say for now, maybe they can connect with you and you can email me. We're trying to formalize our volunteer process also. I've been working with our events coordinator to kind of set up specific refugee teams, individuals who are interested in housing setup, and individuals who are interested in transportation. And they've got they're building email and text lists for individuals who are interested based on what they're interested in. So an email is always the best way to get in touch with me. If you just want to provide my email address to anybody who might be interested, I had it on this slide, and then I don't know if I just didn't save it or what. And then my battery's low now. Yeah, it's just connect with John here, and he'll get you in touch with me, and we'll figure out where we can go from there.
I don't know who was ultimately responsible, but I did this 20 years ago
Oh,
from a different church.
okay.
And my husband and I were responsible for the department,
Mm-hmm.
and we did all of it. We did everything from dishes to cookware to beds to linens.
Yeah.
Some of it came out of my house.
Yeah.
Because my children were grown and
Exactly.
we could dispense with some of those.
Yeah.
And I know that my husband and I were connected. These were people from Ukraine.
Mhm.
And they were pretty much attached to our church. And we got things from, I'm not sure now whether it's Redeemer Lutheran or West Press, one of these down the street. And they had a place in the back of their church where they collected things. So that when we didn't have something that we wanted to give up out of our house, we went there and got things. And we became, at the time, good friends with them. And I have run into their daughter a few times since then, because she was the age of she was a little younger than my children.
Mhm.
So we had a good connection. And when my kids were home, they would connect with them. But it was a very fulfilling process. I know that we enjoyed it very much. The only thing that happened was that when we would go there after the fact, when they were here, and it was at Ely Park, and they fed us every time.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
My husband finally said, "You got to stop doing that. We're gaining weight." And
Yeah.
use up your resources on us, but it was a good thing to do, and I wish your shed was bigger because I have things.
Yeah. We wish our shed was bigger, and it's pretty big, but we wish it was bigger also because we know there's a lot out there.